This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we've provided in the chat, or we will provide real soon now, and by visiting our website. I'm your host today, Sarah Smith, and you can find out more about me in the provided handout. Today we'll be featuring 6 authors: Joan Marie Verba, Morgan Chalut, Sara Codair, Barbara Krasnoff, Elle Marie Wood, and Stephanie Damore. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader is Joan Marie Verba. Joan Marie Verba has a Bachelor of Physics degree and was an associate instructor of astronomy. She currently works as a writer, an editor-publisher, and a web developer. She's a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America and the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. Joan Marie, take it away.
Happy to. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Joan Marie Verba, and I have a giveaway, a PDF file of this young adult haunted house story, Defying the Ghosts. The story is about an 18-year-old who was thrown out of the house by her widowed mother on her 18th birthday. She has been trying to find permanent shelter and hasn't been able to. She hears of a haunted house where the owner will give the house to anyone who can stay overnight. She finds people who have tried to claim the house earlier and asks them about their experiences. At this point of the story, she's in the house and the ghosts are actively trying to drive her out. Chapter 7. Another respite, more whispering, though still no clear words within her range of hearing. Apparently, the ghosts needed to discuss what to do next. When listening to the accounts of others who had come before her, she had noted that they had all left the house after a single event. Either that, or they had not reported other events, telling her only about the event that had caused them to rush out. But she felt that probably was not the case, given that they had all been forthcoming and detailed about their experiences. Certainly, Sean would have told her if there had been previous attempts to drive him out before he felt the oxygen had gone out of the house. He was a very precise man. Another common thread was that on the reported attacks, the ones she experienced thus far, she had not required a lot of force on the part of the ghosts and not a lot of force on her part to resist. They were ghosts, after all, beings without much substance. The ghost who had tried to strangle her had nothing she could strike against or hold on to. Many of the self-described ghost experts she had read agreed that the greatest power of a ghost was to induce fear. Ghosts did not have the reputation of demonstrating feats of super strength. Now that she thought about it, she wondered if the strangulation attempt had been fake. Perhaps before he had completely cut off her oxygen, he might have relaxed his grip on the sash enough so that she could have pulled loose in the hopes that she would run out the front door. He might have, but she remained convinced that she had done right by escaping. In the annals of human conflict, the instances of parties trying to simply scare a victim but accidentally killing the victim in the process were numerous. Meanwhile, the thought that the ghosts were not all powerful and she was not helpless against them both emboldened and comforted her. All she needed to do was outlast them. Still, it promised to be a long night, and she had to remain on her guard if she was to avoid serious injury. Gaining the house but losing a limb, for instance, was not her idea of victory. The sound of running water disturbed the silence. Someone had turned on the kitchen faucet. Taking up the shorter candlestick, she stood and crept toward the kitchen door. Peering inside at the threshold, she could see nothing, not even a ghostly outline. Water continued to rush out of the faucet, and from the sound, someone had plugged the drain and one of the double sinks was beginning to fill. Ghost or not, she was not going to allow the kitchen floor to be flooded. Water on the floor would cause her to slip, but she doubted if it would affect the ghosts. With the candlestick ready in one hand, she stepped carefully toward the sink. As she reached out with her free hand to turn off the faucet, the sink sprayer hose snaked upwards. Water sprayed into her face. She turned her head to avoid it. Dropping the candlestick, she put both hands up to deflect the stream, only for the spray to come from another direction and right into her face again. With one hand over her nose and mouth, she tilted her head in the direction of the spray, and when the nose touched the spray stem, she grabbed it with both hands, wrenched it away, and guided the hose back into its place. Something pushed the back of her head right into the sink until her nose and mouth were underwater. She grabbed the edges of the sink on either side and pushed up with all her might. Her head came out of the water. She gasped for breath. Quickly, she stepped to one side as far as she could and turned. Nothing there. Hurriedly, she picked up the candlestick again, pivoted, and turned off the faucet with her free hand. She reached into the standing water and pulled out the stopper. As the water drained, she surveyed the kitchen again. She looked and felt empty. With water dripping from her head and the top of her golf shirt soaked, she strode out of the kitchen. She paused to turn off the air conditioning, hoping that would help her get dry faster, and walked up the stairs. The linen closet door remained open where she had left it. Still clutching the candlestick, she rooted around with her free hand until she felt a towel and dried herself the best she could one-handed. Thinking a towel might be useful, she draped it around her neck. Her earlier thought about retrieving a pillow came to mind. She stepped back to see if one was immediately evident on the shelves. Clunk. Not again. She sighed. The shaft? But no, the shaft had to be on her right. The noise came from her left. She turned. A tall man strode toward her, carrying a large wooden beam. This was not Calvin, though this ghost too had a muscular frame. She considered the small candlestick in her hand and decided what she needed was the large one instead. All she had to do was run down the stairs and retrieve it. Except she couldn't. Just the act of turning met with resistance, as if her muscles had stiffened. She moved a little, but still found herself facing the ghost, who plodded toward her with a determined expression. This reminded her of a recurring nightmare in which she would be chased by a deadly monster, but was unable to move more than a few inches at a time. As in the nightmare, even pushing with all her effort and expending all of her will resulted only in a slight change of position. The ghost plodded on. She needed a plan B. Ghosts might be affecting her muscles, but there seemed to be a limit to their power as well as their imagination. In this case, maybe gravity was her friend. As much as she wanted to get away from this menacing ghost, she put all her effort into turning to one side and leaning forward. She started bending her knees and raising up on the balls of her feet. All the while, she kept an eye on the ghost, who advanced steadily. Just as he lifted the wooden beam, apparently to strike, she began to topple, and as she fell, the muscles loosened, and she was able to crouch, push off with her feet, stretch out on her side, and slide on the floor past the ghost. Once clear, Charlene scrambled to her feet and grabbed the wooden beam from behind. There was little resistance, but when the beam came loose, she found it was sufficiently thick that she had to drop the candlestick and hold it with both hands. She ran past the ghost to the door of the shaft at that level and dropped the beam into it. A second later, she heard a satisfying thud. She swung around quickly. No ghost. Scanning the room, she walked to the candlestick, picked it up, and cautiously padded down the stairs. Once at ground level, she paced the floor of the main room, looking up, looking around. No sign of ghosts. She lowered the candlestick, and in doing so, she realized that her muscles had tense. To reassure herself that she still had a full range of motion, she rolled her shoulders, raised her arms, and performed a few windmills and brought each knee up in turn. Satisfied, she walked to the chair by the window, folded the towel, and placed it on the ledge. She put the candlestick next to the other one. Making sure that both candlesticks were within reach, she sank into the chair, threw her head back, and sighed.
Thank you, Jean Marie.
Thank you.
Our second reader, brava. Our second reader is Morgan Chalut. Morgan has been writing since she learned that anyone was allowed to do it. It didn't slow down her talking at all, but at least it gave her family a break now and then. She hopes to continue to discover characters and worlds she can plot and explore and share. Morgan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So this is the first book of a trilogy that I am publishing, which is the Unwoven Tapestry trilogy. The second book, Hunter, is actually coming out this month, before the end of the month. So very excited about that. Writing's only been my live stream. That's all. So I'm publishing through Water Dragon Publishing, and you can find the books there as well. So Seeker is Just trying to remember my intro there. But as you can see the description on the screen. So this is the start of chapter 3 and will be it's happening shortly after a fight has occurred. And so some time has passed and our characters are traveling onward. Reuben looked tiny in the borrowed cloak. 4 days into their travel now, a storm had blown up the day before and brought the chill of true winter. They weren't looking forward to the night rising when stars seemed to bleed ice instead of fire. Whitman performed in the corner of the inn they occupied, cowering from the wind any time the door opened. He played his lute and sang with a wooden bowl on the floor in front of him. It held a few coins, half a loaf of bread, and a baked potato, still steaming, which wasn't a terrible take. He looked in good cheer, at least. Donovan warmed his hands against a mug of hot tea, recently returned from selling the horses they'd taken from the hunters. He was sure he had done a good job of bargaining. He'd grown up haggling for his father's farm, but knew they were absolutely losing out. Whitman returned to the little table that Reuben and Donovan had held and set down his bowl, propping his lute beside him. Ungrateful wretches would not know good music if it made a merry home amongst their overgrown nose hairs, plucking dulcet tones to every sneeze. Why not their ear hairs? Reuben asked, shivering and burrowing into the cloak. Ear hairs are too good for the likes of them, the bard answered, perusing his bowl. Ooh, a turnip! God's bless and keep you, fine gentles. The door opened to admit someone. With it came a solid wall of icy wind. Donovan adjusted his brimmed hat, courtesy of Whitman's pack, and drew his wool coat tighter around his shoulders and hips. The sword he'd kept was belted around his waist. He wasn't confident in its use of it, but hoped the sight would give others pause. How went the sales, Don? Whitman asked, seriously. As well as could be expected. Our money should hold us a little ways longer, but not far. Should it come to starvation, gentlemen, I will serenade us into dreams of plenty so that we might die painlessly, dancing amongst images of pies and potatoes, and turnips, of course. Whitman took a healthy bite from the root vegetable and held it out to Reuben, who rolled his eyes and remained bundled inside the large cloak. Should it come to starvation, Whit, we'd eat you first, Donovan told him, rubbing frozen hands together. Nonsense! The boy would go first. We could eat him and a few hearty meals, whereas the majority of my cuts would go to rot before you finished. It would be a very sad demise to be so thoroughly wasted. At least we can all agree that I'd be last, Donovan said, now rubbing his arms inside his coat to warm up. Old age brought experience and poor circulation. You are much too tough and stringy, good man, Whitman agreed. It would definitely be the boy. I just hope to give you a terrible case of indigestion and that you fart in front of everyone you meet, Reuben answered tartly. Whitman looked askance. How could you? After all I have done for you, I would even make it a clean and painless death and then roast you above a perfectly laid fire and seasoned with lemon and sage and pepper. You would be fantastic. Whitman jokingly wiped drool from the corner of his mouth, eyeing the boy hungrily. Where are we going from here? Reuben asked. At the change of subject, the young bard grinned and bit into his turnip once more. He handed the potato to Reuben. It was soft and still lukewarm, so he took a healthy bite, skin and all. Donovan pulled the hand-drawn map out of his inside pocket and unfolded it on the table. He traced a finger along the creased page and described their route. You know this area impressively well, Whitman mused. Have you come this way before? A few times, yes, but as I said, I can read a map. Donovan folded the drawing and tucked it away. Now that the little herd is gone, we'll draw less attention. Assuming we can keep ours fed and watered, Reuben added. They eat more than Whitman does, and I've never seen a man eat a whole pie before. It was a raspberry, the bard exclaimed, licking his lips and remembering fondly. And that server only charged me for a slice. A skilled tongue attracts all the lovers, boy. Remember that for your future. Anyway, Donovan sighed, exasperated. We'll stay the night here. There's no reason to carry on while it's threatening a storm, and we'll leave at dawn. Whitman exclaimed, a plan! They steeled themselves against the troubles that would surely meet their path, planning and plotting their future, knowing full well that reassessment lay in their way, for no strategy yet lasts through the first bite of battle. Now you make it sound like we're going to fail before we've even started, Reuben whined. I am only making it more dramatic, the bard explained patiently. This way, when we succeed and get you all trained up, I will be able to compose my epic and win fame and fortune across the lands. King Bronn will reward me with more gold than I can count, and the courtiers will throw themselves down at my feet. Oh yes? They'll be trying to get away from the shadow of your giant head then. Whitman clutched his chest. A barb! So cruel the poisoned tip, so heartbreaking to be betrayed by a friend. Avenge me, dear Donovan. With your last breath, avenge me. Whitman slid under the table. Donovan reached over and flicked Reuben's ear. The boy grabbed the smarting appendage and glared at the older man. Whitman came out from under the table at impressive speed and plopped himself down beside the boy to take a bite from his potato. "Hey," Reuben snarled, wrenching his arm and meal away. "You caused my death. The least you can do is give me a bite," the young man replied, unashamed. "You ate your turnip. I offered you some. All right, you two, don't attract attention." "I cannot help it, dear Donovan. I attract all sorts with my glib tongue, sultry voice, and excellent sense of hygiene. It is who I am." "Yes, well, I'd rather the two of us stayed unnoticed. Until my epic is written, so when we get to the order, you had best study hard, understand? I refuse to write a story and song about some mediocre mage who fails to even magic his own shoes tied." "Hush," Donovan snapped. "Don't speak so easily about our destination. The walls have ears, and I'd rather not risk a tail." No, that wouldn't look at all impressive," Whitman agreed, "unless it were a cat's tail." Donovan glared at him.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.
Our third reader is Sara Codair. Sara Codair is a community college writing teacher and author of speculative stories. They partially owe their success to their faithful feline writing partner, Goose, the Meowditor. You can follow Sara and Goose's writing journey on Twitter and Instagram at Shattered Smooth and on TikTok at @SCodairWrites. And I'll put that in the chat. Take it away, Sara.
All right. So as you see, I'm reading from Distant Gardens, which is a collection of short stories. The one I'm reading for Bree and the Marsh Kraken is set in the near future on Cape Cod. Salt marsh was Bree's favorite smell. There was something about the sweet, salty scent of decay and rebirth that made her feel at home. Home. Hope. The warm sensation in her chest blocking out cold drafts of despair from a world that was too damn hot. Sweating from a long ride, Bree got off her bike. She needed a break, a moment to compose herself before the last half mile to her childhood home. She leaned her bike against a pitch pine's rough trunk, kicked off her shoes, and tiptoed past the bushes at the edge of the crumbling asphalt causeway, admiring the expanse of green blades poking up through dark brown muck and last year's decaying yellow grass. Her toes curled into the mud, rooting her to the ground until she felt like she was part of the land, like she belonged as much as a tree. There were people further out, on the far side of the marsh. Researchers, probably. Not that they'd save it from climate change. The marsh, like the rest of this godforsaken planet, was dying. Still, there was a silver lining. Rising sea levels and frequent hurricanes had driven Cape Cod property values down to something Bree could actually afford. And the land upon which her childhood home once stood was for sale. She was going to buy it back. She was meeting the realtor in 15 minutes. She needed to smile. She needed to get back on her bike, cross the causeway onto Monomoskoy Island, and take the first right down her old driveway. She needed to go the rest of the way home. But her feet wouldn't budge. What if it didn't work out? What if she got there only to find out it had already sold? She shook her head. No one wanted to live here anymore. People were selling lots for a fraction of what they paid 20 years ago. Plus, the realtor wouldn't let her drive all the way here for nothing, right? She took another deep breath and stepped away from the marsh, back to the road. A deep burbling made her pause. What is that? She glanced over her shoulder. On the far edge of the water, where marsh met saltwater pond, a ring of ripples disturbed the still water. A deep groan rose from the earth. Not good. The ground trembled beneath her feet. Before she could properly react, Bree toppled over, twisting as she fell so as not to damage the delicate mat of greenswing at her feet. The edge of the marsh met asphalt, and asphalt met Bree's knees, drawing blood. The ground twisted. Jagged cracks, born of last winter's excessive cycle of freezing and thawing, widened to fissures. Earthquake? They happened in the Northeast, but rarely. Never this bad. A deep rumbling groan warred with a loud ringing in her ears. Why did this have to happen today? The crack rang through the air as the utility pole came down on the causeway. Bree scrambled back towards the marsh. Grass bent and scraped her hands. Mud squirted between her toes and splattered her legs. She kept scrambling forward until she tumbled into a pool of water, crushing sharp blades of marsh grass with flailing arms. A slurping belch came out from the marsh. Someone screamed. The researchers? Yes. They were running towards her as brown tentacles whipped out of the muck and flailed at them. Tentacles? Attacking people? In the marsh? In her marsh? Impossible. I need to get out of here, Bree muttered, touching her head to feel for a bumper scrape. She didn't remember hitting it, but she might not if she had a concussion. Another scream. Tentacles wrapped around a man's ankle. He fell. Fear stung Bree like a jellyfish. A shot of adrenaline. She scrambled to her feet and lurched forward to help, only to slip on something slimy and faceplant in the water. The marsh, it seemed, did not want her to go. Tentacles slithered back into the marsh. She blinked, and they were gone. So were the people. The water stilled. A breeze rustled tall grasses. Birdsong returned. She stood, finally, her clothes soaked, the air touched chiller than before. Nothing in the marsh should have tentacles like that, right? Could it have been what? A discarded pet snake? An oversized eel? And the people? Where had they gone? Did they have a boat? Bree hadn't noticed and rode away. Maybe terrified of the giant pet snake? Yeah, that seemed reasonable. Bree got on her bike and rode. Past a tangle of poison ivy and scattered lady slippers was a driveway, torn up and wider than she remembered. Sand and shells crunched under her tires. The dip on the left was still there. It had snagged her bike tire when she was 10. The fall would have been softer had it been sand like when Bree was a kid and not speckled with the remains of crushed shells by the new owners. She landed on her knees. Again, one of those shells sliced her palms deeper and deepened the cut she already had. Sand clung to her soaked clothes. Sweet pine, salt, and dust mingled in her nose. She lingered on the ground, digging her fingers into the dirt, breathing in the scent of home, of childhood, of freedom, a place where she belonged. Bree, are you all right? The voice was familiar, though she hadn't heard it in years. It belonged here. It was the realtor she talked to on the phone. It wasn't the realtor she talked to on the phone, but someone 1,000 times better. She'd last heard it when? 12, 13 years ago? Definitely during Tilly Blake's slumber party when they'd been telling stories near the fireplace of haunted marshes and ghostly apparitions and tentacles? Was she remembering that right? Yes, no. Bree pushed away curls out of her face. Did you feel that earthquake? Yeah, that's the worst one I felt since I moved back east. Gretchen Morrison, Bree's old neighbor, stared down at her, wearing the same half-smothered smirk Bree remembered from childhood. Her short brown hair shone in the sun, sweat beaded on her forehead from humid air. She picked at chapped lips, or tried to anyways. Her nails were too short to pick at anything. She'd always kept them that way. You're all scraped up. Did the quake knock you off your bike? Not exactly. You look different. I've never seen you in anything other than jeans. Gretchen's hands flew to her side, smoothing a perfectly pressed short-sleeved white button-up with purple octopus print. Her khaki shorts were also wrinkle-free. A carabiner lined with keys hung from her belt loop. Her legs were unshaved. Bree remembered Gretchen had strong opinions about shaving as a teenager, and her feet were bare. Classic Gretchen, aside from the stiff glows. Gretchen crouched down in front of her and offered a sun-kissed hand. I grew up. And you're pretty banged up. Here, let me help. They fit together perfectly. They always had. Memories stirred up emotions too long buried. Bree thought she'd left Gretchen here in the marsh, buried under the mat in the salt water with her old home. And now, here they were, memories in her childhood home and Gretchen, tingling across her skin from the feather touch of Gretchen's fingertips, assaulting her senses as the salt and the humidity and Gretchen's floral perfume collided and surrounded Bree. And I will leave off there. If you want to read more about Gretchen and the marsh, saving the marsh and tentacles, check out Bree and the Marsh Kraken and Distant Gardens.
Thank you, Sara. Our fourth reader is Barbara Krasnoff. Barbara Krasnoff's stories have appeared in a variety of publications. Sabbath Wine, which was published in Clockwork Phoenix, was a finalist for the 2016 Nebula Award, and her novel, The History of Soul, 2065, from Mythic Delirium Books, appeared in June 2019. Currently, she's reviews editor at The Verge. Barbara, yours.
Thank you very much. Rosemary, that's for remembrance. I remember when I was a girl, I loved going to the beauty shop. It had light blue walls, I think, and a radio. I sat under the dryer wearing a pink smock, reading the latest issue of Vogue and listening to, what was her name? To one of my friends talking about her latest boyfriend. It was nice. Kay's is nice too. The woman in charge comes to greet us. She has bright yellow hair and thick glasses, and she says hello to me, not just to the woman who brought me. Should I know her? The way a lot of people do. And she wears a name tag on her pink smock so that I always know her name. It says Kay, with tiny purple flowers entwined around it. Even though I've only lived in this neighborhood for a few years, I remember that I grew up in Williamsburg and brought up my children in Canarsie. I remember those years very well. Kay's looks like all the beauty shops I ever knew. Once, I remember, I went to a new one, and it had deafening music and strange machines and tall boys talking loud and winking at the others when they thought I didn't see. I know I'm old. I can't help it. They'll be old one day too, and why don't they understand that? Kay smiles at me, takes my coat and my pocketbook, and helps me sit down in one of the chairs while the woman who brought me goes and sits in front of the salon and starts reading a magazine. And how are you today? Kay says, while she puts a towel around my neck and then covers me with a flowery cape to protect my clothes. I'm fine, I say, although we both know I'm not fine at all. I'm disappearing, bit by bit. I don't know why, and neither do they, the doctors, I mean. Tests are inconclusive. I can understand these things. I've got a master's in history, after all. They say it passed me, though, to the woman who lives with me, who says she's my friend Isabeau. But I remember an Isabeau. She's young and slim and has two lovely children, not elderly and sad like this woman. But I listen, and sometimes I remember. Kate chats to me while she dampens my hair and takes out her scissors. I had beautiful hair. I have photos, thick and brown. Jack used to run his hands through it and beg me not to cut it. The long hair wasn't the fashion, and I really looked better with short. Now I look in the mirror, and it's all dull gray. I can see parts of my scalp showing through. It makes me want to cry more than the wrinkles and the pieces of my life that have disappeared. I start to get up, to get away from the mirror. But the moment I start to move, Kay swings the chair around, so I'm looking instead at the TV set that's been set up high on the back wall. There, she says, you don't mind facing the wall, do you? It's so much easier for me. She chatters on about her friend's daughter who is pregnant and miserable, about how the weather has been unseasonably icy, and why do they call it global warming when things are getting colder? Beneath the TV set, a young Asian girl with a sour expression works on the nails of an old woman with bright orange hair. Am I that old? Surely I'm not that old. And nods and says we've ruined the world and that one day we'll wake up and all the oxygen will have disappeared from the earth. She says it with satisfaction. There you are, says Pat. No, not Pat. That was the woman who cut my hair when I was a girl. This is Kay. It says so on her name tag. Ready for the dryer? Kay puts a pillow on the chair so I can sit comfortably and settles me in. She puts a magazine on my lap and brings over a small can of ginger ale, placing it on a table next to the chair. There, she says, we like to make our ladies comfortable. Ready? I nod and look up at her. She takes her glasses off and smiles. And wait, something is wrong. Her eyes are striped, completely striped through the pupils and the irises and the whites, all green and silver. I want to call out, to warn somebody, but I don't know who here will help me. And then she pulls the dryer over my head down like a giant upside-down cup and turns it on. Something hums and grabs my head and my brain, and where I smell morning and hear eggs frying, and there is sunlight coming through the gauze kitchen curtains. Julie, it's a school day, young lady. Do you know what time is on our side? And her eyes are getting cold. It's cold outside. Please stop blowing bubbles in your milk, round like a hairdryer. Yes, honey, your tie is on the hanger. Does he still love me? Don't tease the bye, baby bunting. Have a good day at the office, dear. And don't forget, and there he goes, and she goes, and they go, and it's quiet, and oh, the baby's crying. Well, what is that sound? And where did everyone go? And what was I going? It's all going. It's all there now, a voice says. That didn't hurt a bit, did it? There's a woman standing over me, wearing a smock with flowers and a tag. I suppose it's a name tag, but I can't read it. It's just squiggles. I'm in a subplace with a lot of women, and it looks nice, but something is missing. The woman smiles at me and bends down. It's all right, she whispers, and her eyes are pretty stripes. And somewhere under her voice is something, a hissing or a crackle. I can't tell what it is or what she is. I can't, I tell her. If I could only, but I just can't. They're missing. Don't worry, she says. We've got them. We've collected them from you and many like you, and we'll keep them safe long after you and yours are gone. She puts on a pair of glasses and raises her voice. Now, let's go back to the chair and I'll comb you out. She helps me up and takes me to a chair. I sit and look at the old woman in the mirror and wonder who she is. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Our fifth reader is L. Marie Wood. L. Marie Wood is an award-winning psychological horror author and screenwriter. She won the Golden Stake Award for her novel, The Promise Keeper. Her screenplays have won Best Horror, Best Afrofuturism Horror Sci-Fi, and Best Short Screenplay Awards at several film festivals. Learn more about L. Marie Wood at www.lmariewood.com, and I'll post that. Take it away, Marie.
Thank you so much. Well, today I'll be reading from The Realm, which is book 1 of the Realm trilogy. Book 3 actually comes out later this year in October. So let's start from the beginning. Chapter 1. It didn't happen the way they said it would. No angels came to greet him. No bright light funneled a path through the darkness. No relatives called to him from the beyond. He didn't feel warmth, acceptance, or love. He felt emptiness. He saw nothing in the moments before death, just an impenetrable darkness that crowded his vision, like oil spreading in water, encroaching on the faces of his son and daughter-in-law, blackening them, obliterating them. He could hear them after his eyes dimmed, standing open and blind like black holes. His tear ducts dried up as his son cried over him. The sound of Doug's grief, the guttural moans roiling and meshing with his pleas, his barters with God to save his father, were more than Patrick could take. Trying but failing to lift his hand from his side and stroke his son's head, Patrick silently prayed that his hearing would dissipate as quickly as his sight had. Patrick could only imagine what Doug and Chris were seeing as his body broke down in front of them. Images of eyes ruined by broken capillaries, filled with blood, his slack mouth allowing a discolored tongue to peek through and tortured his mind. He struggled for every breath now, death's grip holding fast and firm. The thought of the kids seeing him fight for air, his face a twisted mass of pain and effort, upset him more than he thought it would. Death was not pretty. Doug moaned and Chris cried while Patrick's eyes grew drier and his skin grew paler. He thought it would never end, the display, the sick, cruel game Death was playing. That they should witness it, that he should have to hear the calmness his son usually displayed crumble and fall away was torture if ever there was a definition of the word. The devil, then, it was his work, after all, he supposed. He was on his way to hell, and this was but a taste of what was to come. And then there was silence, utter silence. The sound of his son's anguish was gone, mercifully. The hum of the respirator, the clicking of the rosary beads the man in the next bed held, the squeak of the rubber soles on the sanitized floor as the nurses and doctors hurried to his side, all sound had disappeared. He wondered what would go next. His memory? He quizzed himself just to see if it was already gone. What's my name? Patrick Richardson. How old am I? 59. Was is more like it, he corrected himself. After all, he was dead. Dead, gone, finished. Patrick stood in the black silence, confused and unbelievably sad. He was dead. He would never see the baby that Chris was carrying, his first grandchild. He wouldn't ever watch another boxing match with his son and friends over beer and pizza. He wouldn't get the chance to watch the waves break on the shore from a beach in the Caribbean because he was dead. And death was dark, impenetrably so. But how did this happen? He asked aloud, using a mouth he could no longer feel. He thought back to that morning when he was taking out the garbage. He could remember walking to the back of his house and getting out the garbage can. The damned cat had gotten into it again. The little stray he left food and water for had knocked the top off the can, torn through the garbage bag, and gotten to the trash inside. The little monster made a hell of a mess, too, strewing soggy newspaper, chicken bones, orange juice cartons all over the brick patio. Patrick remembered cursing out loud and casting his eyes around the backyard, looking for the cat. He remembered turning back to the bowl he'd left out the night before and finding it full of food. That's what she was supposed to eat, damn it, he said, as he bent down to clean up the mess. On his way back to the house to get another garbage bag, a piece of the dream he had the night before came back to him. It hung in front of his eyes like a transparency over real life, framing everything with the hazy film of familiarity, all soft edges and anticipation. Deja vu. As usual, after those dreams, the dark ones that made him wonder if he was there, really there, walking, talking, living within them, he wondered if he was the character whose face the audience never sees. The memory was faint, as it always was the morning after, but he knew what happened next. This time, the scene was identical to his dream. There was usually something askew, some crucial piece off center, but this time, nothing was out of place. He knew he would turn away from the door instead of going inside to get the garbage bag. He knew he would squint from the sun when he did, and that he would place his hands above his eyes, shading them like a visor. He knew it just as well as he knew his name, for as easily as that knowledge came, it dragged heavy fear and worry in its wake. He obliged. It wasn't like he had a choice. Patrick heard the shriek coming from next door, pulling him away from the dream world and into the land of the living with a jolt. It came from Mary Williams's house, an old lady who lived alone despite her diminished vision and limited use of her legs. She got along fine, though. She cooked her own meals, cleaned her own house. She hardly left anything for the day nurse to do. Spunky old girl, Patrick remembered thinking. I hope I'm as with it as she is when I get to be that old. Something cold took up residence in his stomach, grafting itself to his insides and pulsating there. The shrieking voice didn't sound like Mary's, though. It sounded younger, more vibrant, less gravelly, and weathered with age. It was probably the day nurse Jennifer with a sigh. With a sigh, Patrick detoured from his front door, crossing the lawn to Mount Mary's front steps. The old girl might have kicked the bucket, he thought, as he approached the door. He felt genuinely saddened by the idea. The dream was dissipating, and Patrick was happy about that. Sure, he could still feel it playing along the edges of his consciousness, enticing him to come back and play, but it would lose this time and evermore. Patrick knocked on the door and called out to Jennifer, Mary's nurse, announcing himself. The door was ajar, and the force of his knuckles pushed it open. Patrick walked inside hesitantly, calling for Jennifer all the while, but there was no response. He called for Mary then, wondering if something had happened to the girl instead. Nothing. 2 steps into the foyer, and Patrick could see into the living room and dining room on the opposite side of the hallway. There was no one in sight. Patrick remembered thinking he should leave, thinking that he had been hearing things. But why didn't they answer? And why was the front door open? That Jennifer's car was in the driveway didn't register in his mind when it happened, but Patrick could remember it as clear as day as he recounted it. If he could do it all over again, he would do the same thing. He was sure of it. What happened was just meant to be. I think I have to stop here. I think I'm running up against time. If you're interested to know what happens with Patrick, because unfortunately, poor Patrick, you find out pretty quickly, check out my new series. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Our final reader is Stephanie Damore. Stephanie Damore is a USA Today best-selling mystery author with a soft spot for magic and romance. She loves being on the beach, has a strong affinity, excuse me, for the color pink, especially in diamonds and champagne, and not to brag, that Chocolate and Stephanie are in a pretty serious relationship. Stephanie, yours.
Okay, hi guys. Happy to be here tonight, or whatever time it is where you're at. So this book that I'm reading from is the Witch in Time series, and it features V. Harper, and she is a time-traveling cold case solving witch. And this is the first book in the series. The third book comes out May 10th. And this passage that I'm going to read starts in the middle of chapter 1. She has just broken up with a man-child of a boyfriend, and he's acting ridiculous on her front porch when she receives a new case. The other person who is with her is her Siamese cat familiar, Agatha. So the dialogue with Agatha is a cat. That might clear things up. Okay. Then my evening brightened as I spotted an unmarked delivery truck heading down the country road and come bumping at my dirt driveway. To the average eye, the nondescript white truck looked like it could be delivering anything. Flowers, food, furniture. Only I knew it was something more. After 15 years working for the Agency of Paranormal Particularities, I could spot a new case coming from a mile away. A country mile, to be exact. Except when the cases just magically appeared on my dining room table. I hated when they did that. Agatha rubbed against my leg, telling me she saw it too. Being made of magic, she could go wherever I went, including back in time, when she felt like it, which was exactly what we did for the agency. I was one of the select few witches trained to travel back in time and solve cold cases. Only they weren't cold when I arrived on the scene. Like my mother, I lived for the job, and I never turned down a case, ever. Let's just hope I wouldn't meet the same fate she did, and one day never return home. Andrew continued to declare his love for me and begged me to reconsider dumping him while I signed for the familiar marked package. You okay? The delivery driver asked me while handing the package over. No doubt he was a supernatural of some sort. Werewolf, if my nose wasn't mistaken. They always gave off a wild scent, like being in the middle of the woods after a rainstorm, earthy and animalistic. The driver eyed Andrew, who was now pacing in the porch, listing off his qualities out loud. Solid job, fast car, nice hair. Andrew ticked the items off on his fingers. Oh, brother. Yeah, it's okay. I've got it, I replied, tucking the awkward-sized box under my arm. I left Andrew on the porch, went inside, and put the box on the couch. Part of me thought of just locking the door, or better yet, hopping back in time to wherever this assignment took me and leaving Andrew on the porch. The only problem with that was he'd still be there when I got back. Grudgingly, I went back out to the front porch. I looked down at Agatha, to Andrew, and back to Agatha. She nodded, knowing what I was about to do. I glanced from side to side out of habit to make sure the coast was clear. Not that I needed to worry, living out in no man's land here. I didn't even have any neighbors, not unless you counted the deer that nosed through the farm fields every evening. With the delivery driver long gone, I walked over and took Andrew by his hand. Skin to skin worked best and unleashed my powers. Andrew smiled at my contact. Then his eyes rolled back, the smile momentarily replaced by a goofy grin, while his mind floated off to La La Land. I was careful to only hold on for a handful of seconds. I didn't want to erase too much of his memory. Andrew blinked a time or two when I let go of his hand. I guess you should be going. What? Andrew shook his head, trying to make sense of the situation. Just so you know, I completely respect that you want to date other people. I planted the seed in his mind where I knew it would grow. Date other people? Andrew scratched his head. Yeah, and you're right. I think there is someone out there who is perfect for you. Perfect for me? Yes, and I'm not her. That was the truth. Good luck. I wish you the best, truly. I patted Andrew on the arm. Right. Okay. Well, good night then. Andrew looked around my yard, seeming to take in the old farmhouse with its freshly painted white clapboard siding and wide plank porch for the first time. He sort of swayed a bit as he walked down the steps back to his flashy sports car. Do you think you might have zapped him a bit too much? Agatha whispered from at my feet. Andrew had veered off to the front walkway and was smelling a leaf on the tree. Nah, he'll be all right, I said, walking back into the house, leaving the screen door to slap shut behind me. The memory's charm effects never lasted long. Agatha patted after me. I heard Andrew's car engine turn over a minute later as I walked back through the kitchen with a pair of scissors in hand. I looked out the front window to see Andrew smoothly back out of the driveway. Andrew put the car into drive and disappeared down the country road. See, he's fine. Now let's see what we've got here. I picked up the box and carried it with me to the kitchen table. Open her up. Let's see where they're sending you off this time, my feline replied. I cut the tape and dug inside. First out was a lovely emerald green dress with cap sleeves, a tight bodice, and a pleated skirt. A girdle, a pair of nylon stockings, black high heels, and a black leather purse completed the look. Inside the purse was a wallet with a fake ID, a handful of dollar bills, and some change. It looked like this time I was jumping back with the name of Anna Yates. I know some witches, like my best friend Lexi, use her family name every time. I preferred to just let the agency assign me an identity. I pushed the clothes aside and rifled through the accompanying papers. A small gold key was tucked into a pocket envelope with an address on the outside. 505 West 85th Street, apartment 2A, New York City. My new residence, I presumed. Then I read the file. A missing persons case, I told Agatha. Irene Hendrick. It appears she walked right out of her family's Upper West Side apartment and was never heard from again. I looked at the accompanying picture of a young lady with dark hair and doe eyes. Where did you go? I asked the photo. Of course, it didn't reply. And the year? Agatha asked, jumping up into the side table and nosing the box contents. 1962. What did I know about New York City in 1962? About the same amount that I knew about living on the Upper West Side. Not much. No time like the present to find out. I added the key and photo to my purse and turned to Agatha. Ready? I asked her. Pass, Agatha said, stretching out into the table, belly side up. What do you mean pass? I might need your help on this one. Everyone knew that familiars were supposed to help witches. It was part of the deal. New York isn't my scene. You know how to find me if you need me. Agatha closed her eyes. Yeah, I did know how to find her, through astral projection, but that took a heck of a lot of power and it would be easier to have her by my side. Come on, it'll be fun. Sorry, can't. Things to do, mice to chase, Agatha mumbled. Seconds later, soft snores filled the air. I sighed. It looked like I'd be tackling this case alone. Let's just hope I didn't need any backup. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you so much to everyone who came today.